Good morning, Daryl Olson with the Flood Company. We're in Clearfield, Utah, just ready to begin a mold removal and cleanup at a small, old little bungalow house in older Clearfield. Let's go inside and I'll show you around a little bit. An older home, and we've been told that multiple water damage episodes over the years with groundwater coming in, especially back 30, 40, 50 years ago with flooded irrigation situations that water came in, standing water. So several episodes over several years. A few other typical plumbing issues. One of them in the ceiling here. This is a laundry room area, but there's kitchen above us right here, and there's been leaks over time. The cardinal rule of mold is dampness and time allows mold to grow or leads to mold. So we have these overhead water damage areas that have been wet for an extended time, darkness in color, and we'll be cleaning up those areas as we clean up the mold. This is particle board or OSB. Again, very visible that it's had water damage over long periods of time. Okay, in this room, this wall may not look obviously bad, but we've got a nice tall 4.5-inch baseboard. We've got rippling on the bottom of the wall. We've got wallpaper that from 40 years ago that's been painted over. The rippling of the wallpaper lets us know that there's been water in the drywall behind the wallpaper. It's bubbled and rippled. A nice tall baseboard like this keeps the wall from breathing very quickly. So there is going to be mold from those materials being wet over extended periods of time and drying slowly. This baseboard, the paint is peeling and cracking, but we've literally got rotting, black color and rotting and softness from the rotting in the bottom of the baseboard. It's a little more visible in the closet, just around the corner, to where the rotting is more prevalent. And the gray and blackish staining above where the rotted materials are literally disintegrated and missing is a little more indicative of mold growth on the surface, but the rotting and missing materials that have just disintegrated. This surface has sort of a vinyl wallpaper. A vinyl wallpaper in particular becomes a moisture barrier. Drywall gets wet, dries very slowly. As we lift up, okay, we don't want to disturb it because we don't have respirators on yet, but the little piece that was covered there is obviously very dark and heavily infested with mold. As we lift up more wallpaper, it'll be equally affected. Just an example of a good visual example of mold that's in this wall and what we expect to find in many of the walls as we expose it further. We have our air pump operating right now. We're collecting some air samples that we'll deliver to the lab. These are pre-samples that will establish the level of mold spores and the type of mold spores in the air as we're just getting started on the job. After the removal is done and all the cleaning is done, we'll follow up with another set of air samples to document and verify the removal was successful and that the levels were clean. So we're timing this sample. We'll have to turn it off in a couple minutes. The visible damage on the bottom of these panel walls are evidence of the long-term water damage that we described. The paneling is not only stained and warped and rippled, but it's literally rotting and separated. The rotting doesn't happen on its own, and it's not just water damage. It requires mold or fungal action for the rotting to take place. The deeper molds that are able to do the rotting or that cause the rotting require 20% moisture content And so this paneling and the bottom of these walls has been damp, thoroughly damp over extended periods of time for rotting like this to take place. Mold removal, once we have mold affected materials, finished materials need to be cut out and removed. Framing, if it's not rotted, if it's still strong, can be cleaned up and treated, but finished materials need to be removed. We're almost done with our 5-minute sample. We're not wearing respirators as we're doing this video because we haven't disturbed any of the mold affected areas yet. We're just walking through, getting started today, moving some appliances out of our way. The next step will be set up containment, set up the air scrubber, establish a negative air pressure before we start disturbing or cutting into any of the mold affected materials. Once we start doing that, large quantities of spores will be released into the air for our protection, as well as to protect the structure and other occupants of the home. The containment and negative air pressure will be necessary, but as we work and enter the work area, once we begin into the mold removal, we'll be donning proper personal protective gear, including HEPA filtered respirators. The sound that you still hear in the background is we're still collecting another air sample, but we're just going to demonstrate collecting of a tape sample on the bottom of this wall as well. Mike is suited up, he has the gloves and respirator on. Lifting a tape sample is disturbing the surface very, very little, but we've still had him put the gloves and respirator on. Just takes a piece of tape, puts it on the wall, lifts it off, and the stickiness of the tape lifts the spores along with it, and that's what we delivered to the lab to analyze the spores that it lifted off of that surface area.